The smoke arrives before the fire does. You notice it first as a faint grey haze hanging at the far end of the street. The kind of haze that makes you think, cooking fire, an accident in someone's kitchen, nothing to worry about. But it doesn't thin, it thickens. And then you hear it, a low, constant crackle that starts somewhere to the east and begins moving faster than a man can run through the narrow lanes of the city you have lived in your entire life. It's the night of July 18th in the year 64 AD. You are in Rome, the greatest city in the world, and it is burning. You grab what you can carry. You don't grab what you can carry. Because the fire moves the way fire always moves in a city packed with wooden tenements and oil shops and stalls stuffed with cloth. It doesn't creep, it leaps. From rooftop to rooftop, from alley to alley, you run through streets turning red with reflected light, and somewhere above the chaos, standing on a terrace high enough to see the whole spectacle unfold, is the man some will blame for all of it. His name is Nero. He is 26 years old. And what he does next will be debated for 2,000 years. Welcome back to Candid Chronicles. If you're here, it's probably late, and your mind is doing that thing it does, reaching for something to hold on to in the quiet. This channel exists for exactly that. New stories every week. Strange ones, deep ones, the kind that leave you thinking for days. Subscribing takes 2 seconds and means there's always something waiting the next time sleep won't come. Drop a comment with where you are in the world and what time it is. I love knowing who's out there in the dark with me, because what actually happened the night Rome burned and what Nero built from its ashes is stranger and more disturbing than anything the history books taught you. Here's what most people think they know about Nero. He fiddled while Rome burned. He was a madman. He probably started the fire himself, cleared the city's prime real estate, and built a monstrous golden palace on the rubble. He was vain, cruel, possibly insane. He killed his own mother. The ancient Romans hated him. Most of that is either wrong, incomplete, or a deliberate lie told by people who needed him to be a monster. Start with the fiddle. Violins didn't exist in the 1st century. The story, which comes from the historian Suetonius, writing nearly 50 years after Nero's death, says Nero climbed to the roof of a tower and sang a lament for the fall of Troy, playing the kithara, a stringed instrument, as he watched the fire from a distance. Even that detail is disputed by other ancient sources. Tacitus, who is considered more reliable than Suetonius, writes that Nero was 40 miles away in Antium when the fire broke out, and that he rushed back to Rome when he heard the news. Tacitus also writes that Nero personally organized relief efforts, opened public buildings as shelters, brought in emergency grain supplies, and spent his own money on the disaster response. Does that sound like a man who started the fire on purpose? Here's what nobody tells you. The accusation that Nero set the fire appears in Roman sources written after he was already dead, written by people working under emperors who had every reason to destroy his legacy. The Senate had declared him an enemy of the state. His successors needed him to be the villain. The historical record about Nero was constructed, at least partially, by his enemies, and yet there is still the palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. One of the most extraordinary, most disturbing structures ever built in human history, and understanding it changes everything you think you know about why Rome burned, and what one man was willing to do to reshape the world. Picture Rome before the fire, not the Rome of marble columns and wide piazzas you've seen in paintings. The real Rome, in the middle of the 1st century, is a vertical slum. A city of 1 million people crammed into wooden apartment buildings 6 and 7 stories high, with no fire code, no organized streets, no urban planning whatsoever. The Subura district, where the poor live, is so densely packed that neighbors in facing apartments can shake hands out their windows. The air smells of wood smoke, fish sauce, tanning leather, and raw sewage. Rome is magnificent, and Rome is a catastrophe waiting to happen. The Great Fire starts near the Circus Maximus on July 18, 64 AD. It burns for 6 days, seems to stop, and then reignites in a second wave that burns for 3 more days. 9 of Rome's 14 administrative regions are damaged. 3 are completely destroyed. 100,000 people lose their homes by conservative estimates. The death toll is unknown, and in the aftermath, with the rubble still warm, Nero builds. Here's where historians and archaeologists have struggled to make sense of the man, because what he builds is not just a palace. It's a vision, it's an argument, it's a kind of insanity so specific and so detailed that it stops looking like madness and starts looking like something closer to obsession. The Domus Aurea covers between 100 and 300 acres in the heart of the city. Historians still debate the exact figure, and that uncertainty alone should tell you something about the scale. He creates an artificial lake where the Colosseum will later stand. He builds dining rooms with rotating ivory ceilings that shower guests with flowers and perfume from above. He covers the walls of hundreds of rooms with painted frescoes so intricate that Renaissance artists would break into the buried ruin 1500 years later, lower themselves on ropes into the underground passages just to copy the designs, and that discovery would launch an entire artistic movement called grotesque painting, named after the grottos they crawled through. There is a statue of Nero at the entrance. It is 120 feet tall. Think about that for a second. 120 feet. Taller than the Statue of Liberty without its pedestal, a bronze colossus of himself, greeting visitors as they entered a private pleasure palace built on the ashes of a destroyed neighborhood. When the palace was finished, Nero supposedly said, "Now I can begin to live like a human being." What did he mean by that? What had he been living like before? And why? Here's the open question that nobody has fully answered. Why did he need this so desperately that he was willing to tear the city apart to build it? To understand the palace, you have to understand Nero before he became the emperor. People feared. You have to go back to a boy. He is born in December of 37 AD to a woman named Agrippina the Younger, the one of the most formidably intelligent, relentlessly ambitious people in Roman history. His father is Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a man described by ancient sources as violent, arrogant, and dishonest, who dies when Nero is 3 years old. His mother is subsequently exiled by her brother, the Emperor Caligula. Nero is raised in poverty briefly by an aunt with a dancer and a barber as his primary guardians. He is 6 years old when his mother returns from exile, her reputation destroyed, her assets seized. Here's the thing about Agrippina, she rebuilds. She maneuvers herself into a marriage with the Emperor Claudius, her own uncle, and then she does the one thing that changes her son's life permanently. She convinces Claudius to adopt Nero as his heir, pushing aside Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Nero becomes emperor at 17. 17. Think about that. You are 17 years old and you are the most powerful person in the known Western world. The Senate fears you. The army is yours. 1 million people live or die at your word. And your mother, the woman who engineered every step of this ascent, who never let you forget what she sacrificed for you, your mother is standing just behind the throne, fully expecting to rule through you. The first 5 years of Nero's reign are considered by his contemporaries to be remarkably good. The philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus effectively govern with him. Tax reforms. Corruption reduced. Legal protections expanded. The Senate has actual power again for the first time in decades. Even Tacitus, who is not sympathetic to Nero, calls this period the Quinquennium Neronis, the golden 5 years. And then, in 59 AD, Nero kills his mother. He tries to drown her in a collapsing boat first. That fails. Agrippina is apparently an excellent swimmer. He sends assassins to her villa. It takes 3 attempts before she dies. By some accounts, as the final blow came, she bared her abdomen to the sword and said, "Strike here. This is the womb that bore Nero." Whether she actually said that or whether a later writer invented it for dramatic effect, the image lodges in history like a splinter. Something broke in Nero that night, or perhaps something that had always been broken simply became visible. In the 6 years between his mother's death and the Great Fire, Nero recedes from governance. He becomes obsessed with performing, singing, acting, chariot racing activities considered deeply shameful for a Roman emperor of his rank. He performs publicly. He tours Greece where audiences cheer him as an artist rather than a conqueror. He wins 1,808 first places prizes at Greek competitions in a single tour, which is either a testament to his talent or an illustration of what happens when the judges know that displeasing you is dangerous. He comes back to Rome carrying his prizes and something else. An idea. The city is wrong. Rome is wrong. The cramped, smelly, vertical, accidental city is not the Rome that should exist. Not for an emperor who has seen the wide marble plazas of Greece. Not for an emperor who thinks of himself as an artist god. Rome needs to be rebuilt. Better. Grander. More like a dream than a city. And then, conveniently, the city burns. Here's what the evidence actually shows and why it matters. The fire almost certainly was not set by Nero. The reason is simple. The fire started in the merchant district near the Circus Maximus, not in the areas Nero needed cleared for his palace. It spread in ways consistent with a city of that density with no fire control. Several ancient sources, including Tacitus, note that the fire seemed to burn longest in areas with the most to burn, and that multiple starting points in the second wave of burning suggested either accident, arson by someone other than Nero, or the structure of the wind that night. Tacitus adds something remarkable. He writes that suspicion fell on Nero, and that Nero, to deflect that suspicion, blamed a group of people already widely disliked in Rome. He called them Christians. He had them rounded up, accused of arson, and executed, burned alive in some cases, used as torches in his gardens at night. This is the first documented Roman persecution of Christians. It happens in 64 AD, in the aftermath of the Great Fire, and it is recorded not in any Christian text but in the Annals of Tacitus, a pagan Roman historian who had no particular sympathy for either Nero or the Christians. He describes the executions as so brutal that even the Roman crowd, which was not known for squeamishness, felt pity for the victims. Think about what that means. The spectacle was so extreme that it created sympathy for people who were being accused of burning your city. Nero had misjudged the crowd, he had misjudged the politics, and he had started building his palace before the rubble had cooled, which was, whatever the truth of his involvement in the fire, a catastrophic act of perception management. The connection that nobody draws. This is the moment that links Nero to the earliest history of Christianity, in a way that almost no one learns in school. The apostles Peter and Paul are both believed to have been executed in Rome during the Neronian persecution, sometime between 64 and 68 AD. The very foundations of the Catholic Church, St. Peter's Basilica sits over what is believed to be Peter's tomb, are rooted in the soil of Nero's paranoia and his desperate need to explain a fire that may have been nobody's fault. Here's the strange vertiginous dimension of this story that historians argue about late at night. What if Nero understood something true? Something about cities, about power, about what it means to shape the physical world to match an interior vision, and was simply wrong in every way about how to pursue it. His reconstruction plan for Rome after the fire was, by any objective standard, brilliant. Wider streets, building height limits, fire-resistant materials, mandatory gaps between structures, covered walkways, individual property lines. For the first time in its history, Rome was rebuilt according to a coherent urban plan. The chaos that had made it so flammable was replaced with something approaching rational design. Tacitus grudgingly acknowledges this. Even the critics admit the new city was more beautiful and more livable than the old one, but the Domus Aurea stood in the middle of it like a wound, a palace that consumed what should have been public land, an artificial countryside installed in the center of a city of 1 million people. When Nero died, 4 years later, the Roman people's reaction was not grief. It was the immediate and systematic destruction of everything he had built for himself. The Colosseum was built on top of his artificial lake. His statue was converted by later emperors into a representation of the sun god. His palace was buried and built over. It was as if Rome needed to erase not just the man but the shape of his wanting. And yet, buried under the Col Oppio hill in Rome right now, 1500 years of construction above it and below the level of the modern street, the rooms of the Domus Aurea still exist. You can visit them. You can walk through chambers where the painted ceilings are still visible, faded, cracked, breathtaking, and you can stand in a rotating dining room that hasn't rotated in 2 millennia. The colors are still there, ochre and blue and deep red. The faces in the frescoes still look at you. What does it feel like to want something so badly that you would burn the world to build it? That's the question Nero poses across 20 centuries. Not, are you capable of his crimes? Most of us aren't, and most of us never will be. But the hunger underneath the crimes, the absolute conviction that the world as it is must be remade to match the world as you imagine it, that feeling in its smaller forms, lives in every human being who has ever looked at their life and thought, this is not enough. Here's the mirror this story holds up to you, lying in the dark right now. Nero is not the story of a madman. He is the story of a child who was never allowed to be ordinary, raised by a mother who taught him that the world was a stage to be conquered, handed power before he knew himself, and left with the terrifying freedom to build whatever he imagined. The palace was not decadence, or it was decadence, but it was also grief. The grief of a man who had never been allowed to simply make something beautiful without it costing someone else everything. He wanted to be remembered as an artist. He wanted to be loved for what he created. He was remembered instead for what he destroyed. The things we build when we feel out of control. The ways we reach for permanence when everything feels fragile. The version of yourself that exists only in your most private imagination. The life that feels more real than the one you're actually living. Nero tried to make that interior world physical. He tried to pour it in concrete and cover it in gold. And for a brief, terrible, beautiful moment, it existed. The Domus Aurea stood for 4 years. Let the smoke clear now. Let the fire settle back into something quiet. Just the glow of memory, just the warm orange of a thing that happened 2,000 years ago in a city that no longer exists in the form it had then. Rome is still there. The Colosseum is still there, built where his lake was. St. Peter's Basilica is still there, built over the grave of a man Nero had executed. The rooms of the Golden House are still there under the hill, waiting. Something about fire makes humans reach toward it. We always have. In the oldest human campsites ever discovered, in South Africa, in the cradle of humankind, going back 1 million years, the fire was the center of everything, the warmth, the light, the reason to stay close to each other. And around those fires people told stories. Stories about power and loss, about what happens when someone reaches too high and what gets left behind when they fall. The same stories for 1 million years. Under the same stars. Close your eyes now. The fire is small and warm and far away. The city is quiet. Whatever you were thinking about before you pressed play tonight, let it soften at the edges. You're still here. That's enough. Thank you for spending this time with Candid Chronicles. If this story moves something in you, a like means more than you know. It tells me this kind of depth is worth making. And if you leave a comment with where you are and what time it is, I read every single one. Subscribing keeps this channel alive. And if you've ever thought about joining as a member, the link is below. No pressure, just an open door. Sleep well tonight. You've just sat with a story that humans have told in different forms since the first fire was lit in the dark. The emperor, the palace, the fire, the ruins. They belong to the long, strange thread of what we are. And that thread runs through you too, wherever you are in the world tonight, breathing slowly in the quiet, under the same sky that watched Rome burn and watched it rise again.